So the questions that we're actually going to talk about today is your emergency fund sufficient? Are you ever done saving? If you have children, how will you help fund their education? What would happen if you lost your job? Have you planned for any expected changes in your living expenses? What's the most reliable way to pay off debt? How can you improve your credit rating? How much of my income should go toward housing? How will you manage finances with members of your household? And lastly, but not least, should you be saving for retirement if you have credit card debt?
A lot to go over there.
Absolutely. And one of the really good things here, if you listen over on YouTube, we do have markers, chapter markers in our video. So if any of those interest you right off the bat, check down in the description and you can jump to any of the questions. Hello and welcome to the Neighborhood Money Podcast, a video podcast here to talk about money, entrepreneurship, and helping you build a life you deserve. If you're new here to the neighborhood, my name is Cavan, and that guy on the other side of the screen or on the other earbud is my co-host, Drew. Drew, how's it going today?
It's going pretty good today. I'm excited for the episode. Had a good weekend. Maybe we can talk about some good stuff in the what's going on in your neighborhood. So a little different episode without having an interview, but pretty excited about going through this list.
Yeah, I got to be totally honest, Drew. I am coming fresh off of Vegas, and I'm sure we'll get into it more later, like you said, but I am running on E. But this episode's got me fired up, so I'm excited to jump in. So today, actually, we've got an article from PenFed Credit Union that is the 10 personal finance questions you need to answer. And Drew, I thought this was a really good article and a really timely article, as it is the start of the new year, and it hopefully can get our listeners to start thinking about these bigger financial questions, and hopefully we can provide some insight into it.
We've had top 10 lists in the past, and this is, I believe, a great starting point for personal finance. Is every time we've talked about it in the past, we always says it's unique. Personal finance is unique to your style and to your household. And to get started, sometimes you don't really know where to start. So an article like questions that you need to be answered are questions that pop up in your mind, say, I didn't think about that for my personal finance journey. I will start thinking about that, and I got to get an answer, and that will help with your goals for your personal finance, budgeting, paying off debt, etc., going forward in the future.
The article starts out with, is your emergency fund sufficient? And they say that experts recommend that you keep enough money in your emergency fund to cover at least 3 to 6 months worth of living expenses. And some of the things that you need to think about when you think about how much money you actually need to have is your lifestyle, cost of living in your area, your income, and your security of your job, the job market in the line of work that you're in, and whether or not you have affordable health care. What are your thoughts around the 3 to 6 months of living expenses for an emergency fund?
3 to 6 months, when you hear that, does seem a bit high, I think, for some people, and be like, no way I can save up that much money. So I think just to start off, my first thoughts on that is don't let it overwhelm you. Start with a small goal of, say, just like $500, but eventually work your way up to that 3 to 6 months. Personally, I have a 6-month emergency fund, which I like, but that was built up over time. And the reason for that is it gives me some flexibility. So if there's any times where if I was really struggling in the stock market, or before, if I was in between jobs, I have a nice cushion of, if I accidentally spend a little bit more per month, or if I have to cut expenses, I can do that. Really don't let it overwhelm you, and have it start off as something as simple as like $500.
You're so right, though, that it is so individualistic, Drew. You said you have 6 months. My family, we have 3. And that's because Hannah and I both have steady traditional jobs in the sense where we get a paycheck every 2 weeks. I think, Drew, one of the biggest things I like to think about, and I don't even know if this is actually coined anywhere, if anyone actually owns this thought, but you can use what I'll call a sleep test. And what I mean by that is whatever helps you sleep the best at night, that's the amount of money that you should have in your emergency fund, whether that's 3, 6 months, 12 months, 24 months, maybe not more than 12 months. But if it helps you sleep better at night, then it's going to be the appropriate amount in your emergency fund.
And when we're talking about these emergency funds, like the way that I went through it in my process was, I wanted to go through like what my for sure payments had to be. And I even added in some like random like subscriptions that I don't necessarily need. So I kind of went above and beyond of what I actually have to pay for on a monthly basis,
Right.
just to give myself a little bit extra cushion there. But, there's also ways for these emergency funds. If you've ever heard of like apps of like Chime or Acorn, if you're wondering, like, there's no way I can save that. An app like a Chime or Acorns is a way to automate that emergency fund. So, say you paid 75 cents for something or round it up to a dollar, that extra 25 cents will go into your checking account. So, I think ways to make emergency fund not overwhelming and being able to automate it is a good idea. Having a goal app is also nice. If you're in Wells Fargo or you have Mint,
Mm.
you can have that goal and you can just slowly check on that. And that kind of just helps you see something physically to keep you on track and kind of makes you feel guilty if you're not working towards that goal.
That segues us nicely into the second question here is, are you ever done saving? You should always have enough regular savings to pay for acute emergencies like replacing your car's tire or paying off credit card debt. So really, Drew, anything outside of just your basic bare bones living expenses that you're going to have in your emergency fund, you should continue to save for other things. Are you
Yeah.
ever really done saving? I guess is the real question.
I guess you're really never done saving. I don't necessarily have a separate account for these acute type of, I guess, expenses. I would take it out. I actually take it out of my emergency fund and then just try replenishing it. Or it just, if I'm under my budget for the month and I have excess dollars and I can pay for it in my checking account, then I will just do that as well. I don't think you
Gotcha.
are really ever done saving just because you're going to potentially have leftover money from your budget and you got to figure out what you want to do with that. If you want to invest it more, pay off more debt, replenish an emergency fund. So I think there's always extra cash, and saving it is just a way to potentially plan where it goes in the future.
One way I like to manage this is you set your emergency fund in an account that you just don't even see, preferably in a high yield savings account. But Drew, what I really love about this is you can kind of just do it however you want, whether you want to pull from your emergency fund, replenish it, or just have that completely separate and not touch it unless a true emergency actually happens.
Something I really haven't thought about too in the past until we had Chris Hanna on for our last episode is the digital envelopes, what he likes to
Yeah.
call them, and having
Uh huh.
separate checking accounts. So when you're talking about, you like having it out of sight, out of mind, just so you don't have the urge to dip into it, I think is a good idea because I personally had the urge to dip into emergency funds for stuff maybe that wasn't an emergency, but
Right.
having it out of sight, out of mind, and having it just totally go to separate account, I think is a really neat idea. So if you're never done saving and you want to have a separate area just for small, cute expenses like this, maybe set up just another random checking
Yeah.
account and um, just pull from that when needed, which I think is a pretty neat idea.
Let's mix it up to number three here. The question is, if you have children, which we both do, so it's pretty relevant to at least us, hopefully our listeners.
Yep.
Some of you also have kids and can take from this, but if you have children, how will you help fund their education? As much as you may want to save for your children's future, don't neglect yours in the process. If you do plan to pay for some or all of the college, begin setting aside money and making other financial preparations as soon as possible once you decide on that decision. And they list off a couple of things, whether it's starting with a 529 plan, helping your child take out student loans or taking out student loans for them, tapping into a Roth IRA, and researching and applying for scholarships. Drew, what do you think about all that?
I love the first sentence about not neglecting your own personal finances. That's my first reaction. I think it's so true. If you're not in the financial place to be putting money away for your kid, I don't really think you should be. I think you should get your house in order first, because if you're struggling when your kid's going through college, I think it's just a recipe for a little bit of a mess. You'll definitely be able to get through it, but I think setting yourself up first, kind of like those airplanes, when if it says the air masks come down, cover your face, then your child's. That's kind of like
Yeah,
saving for education. Uh,
right.
uh, as far as the type of plans for saving, they have the 529s, the covered is it Coverdale ESAs,
Yep, the covered LESAs. Yep.
and I think all those are pretty neat. The 529s I've been coming around to a lot more as of late, and one of the main reasons was being able to pass it to blood relatives or potentially passing it on to your kids, so kind of like your
Right.
grandkids. And that's what's really kind of tossed me around to it. The tax advantage parts of it's really nice, but I was always afraid if they didn't do anything in the education realm, then that money's just kind of in limbo there or getting taken out with a penalty. Being able to pass it on, I think there's a pretty good chance that all that money, if you did have it fully funded, which probably you won't, realistically probably won't, uh, I think it's realistic though that if you can pass it through, that money will be spent on education one way or the other.
What is the goal of the money that you're giving your child, or if it's a relative like a niece or nephew, something like that?
Mhm.
If it's truly for educational expenses and you want control of the money, then a 529 plan is perfect, or an ESA plan is perfect, because it gives you the tax advantage, but it also allows you to actually control the funds
Mhm.
until it's time to pay for college. And if your child doesn't go to college, like you said, you can pass it down to other blood relatives. Another option, of course, would then be like an UGMA or an UTMA, where you're actually giving the money to the child. You're the custodian, but then once they become age majority, and I think in Minnesota here is 18. Once they become 18, then they can. Then that money's just theirs, and they can technically use it for college, but they can also use it for whatever they want. But the benefits there is that you can use it for whatever you want, and you're not paying a penalty if it's not being paid or used for school. So it's really that flexibility question on how much control do you want, and do you truly believe that's going to be used for college education? And if not, you do have other options out there.
And remember, this episode or this article is about questions that you need to answer personally for your future.
Right.
So you're
Right.
talking about the goals that need to be set. You have to think about in your household what it is that you want to do with your money. So if you have kids, education is definitely something you have to think about. Maybe it's something you don't want to do at all, but it should be an answered question. It should be a question answered before you move on or you continue your goal setting with personal finance.
Speaking of goal setting, Drew, question number 4 is, what would happen if you lost your job? So, not quite a goal, but it is planning for potential future, right? Although it's unpleasant to think about losing your job, it's a good idea to be prepared in case you or your supporting member of your household ever faces unemployment. So, some things that you have to consider if you lost your job are those essential expenses: rent, mortgage, utilities, car payments, groceries, healthcare,
Mhm.
all of those things that you have to pay for to survive. You have to make a plan for in the event that you were to lose your job. What do you think?
It's kind of a scary one.
Yeah, I'd agree. It's kind of like the doomsday scenario, right?
Nobody wants to think about losing their job. I think a lot of the one of the big parts of investing for retirement, setting up emergency funds, and maybe potentially even having side hustles is that if you are hit with this reality of losing your job, that you're not going to be completely scrambling and completely stressed out to the max. This is a question. It's a reality that unless, I mean, even if you own your own business, it could just be shut down one day. If you're
For sure.
employed by somebody, they could downsize. If you don't perform, they could just let go of you. And that can happen without you even realizing it. So the biggest part here is to answer that question of what would you do? And if you don't know, if you don't know what you would do, you should probably seriously be looking at this question and saying, do I have my emergency fund set up? Do I have liquid assets, whether it's maybe your investments or mutual funds that you need to get rid of? Are you willing to take a penalty on maybe dipping into your retirement? For me, it starts all with maybe a budget and saying, what are my expenses? What money do I actually need going forward? And for me also, a thing I think about too is just debt.
Yeah.
If you have a good paying job and you're drowning in debt, this might be the scariest question out there is if you lose your
Right.
job,
Right.
are you going to be making those payments? Are you going to be fire sailing all these assets after or what?
Yeah, it's all the more reason to pay down your debt and get it out of your life. But Drew, I think you hit on a really interesting thing earlier on when you first started talking, is the side hustle. Like, this is one of the reasons to start a side hustle, or a different phrase is to diversify your income. So if you do rely on one source of income or two sources of income, if you have a household of two working adults, it's a really good opportunity to say, okay, well, if one of those incomes didn't exist, what we would do, well, if you have more than two or one source of income, you're going to set yourself up so that if you did lose a job or if you did lose a source of income, you're going to have other ones that are going to really going to help you out. And then one more thing, Drew, is one thing that I don't really hear a whole lot about, but it's super important, specifically if you're in the professional world, is you got to have your network of people. So
Yeah.
building that network up, if you do lose your job, you can reach out and you have some helping hands to help you get back on your feet. The emergency fund obviously is so crucial because it's going to get you through those months, but being able to really leverage your network and support system, I think is going to, is a really big answer to this question. And so if that's something that's lacking for you so far, maybe it's something to consider, is to start networking, start building up those
Yeah.
relationships in the event that you
That's
do need to leverage it in the future.
That's a really, really good point. That didn't initially come to my mind, but hearing you say it's actually through this podcast has made me think more and more about growing that network. If you're out somewhere working, I think majority of people that are hiring want to have somebody that they can work with. They'll teach them the job. You don't necessarily need all the experience in the world, but they kind of want to have somebody they can have a good time with at work and still get the job done. And one of the best ways of having more and more people like that is this networking. It's free to do. There's so many platforms on social media. There's so many, just people inside your own job that, know other people. So sometimes just getting out of your comfort zone and networking more. I know that's something that I'm trying to do right now is get out of my comfort zone and
Right.
I just always feel like I never want to ask anybody for anything, but I think you see the more you put yourself out there, the more people want to just help where they can. And that's the same if people come to me, I want to help where I can. So,
You always got to remember that networking, I feel, feels very corporate, has a corporate esque to it, but it's
mhm.
really not. It's really going out there, meeting people and providing them value, and them in turn, hopefully providing you value. So it's not just a one way street. There's, you have to build those relationships and you have to do it authentically. I think that's a really big key piece of it, is you can't just meet someone and expect something out of them. You have to actually build and foster those relationships. All right, Drew, let's go to number 5. Have you planned for any expected changes in your living expenses? Over time, your living expenses will change. So if you haven't already made a plan for the future, establish some short and long-term financial objectives. Those may include paying off debt, refinancing your car or house, buying a house, saving for your child's education, retirement planning, going on that once in a lifetime vacation, or things like renovating your home. This is what we talk about almost every week, right? It's making a plan and establishing a plan.
Yeah, there's a lot of questions to be asked. What's going on potentially in your future? You don't necessarily where you know it's going to take you, but like you said, we've talked about wanting to make these type of goals and make a plan for what it is you want to do in the future, and that helps answer these questions. If it is something is like student debt, not only you have questions on how you're going to pay for that, but what are you going to do once it's paid off? Where's that extra money going? If it's something where you want to buy a house, is it going to be you still be putting more money for your retirement, or is it going to be saving up for that house? Where the house is going to be? Is your job going to potentially move you somewhere? Are you going to have to relocate? Do you travel a lot for your job? Is that a factor in you wanting to find a different job, maybe taking a pay cut so you can stay close to your family? So it's nice to have a paycheck coming in. It's nice to be paying down debt and putting money towards retirement. But the question is, do you plan on staying in that job forever, or do you potentially want to move? Or I don't know. There's a lot of questions.
It kind of almost is, how do you, like, the bigger question of that kind of engulfed in this question is, how do you want to live your life? Do
Yeah.
you want to have children? Do you want to buy a house? Do you want to travel the world? Do you want to retire when you're 45? Like, I think you have to set those big milestones first and be flexible with them changing, because trust me, they change so quickly, especially as you grow and you gain more life experience. But having those big rocks set out there, I think, is a little less intimidating to start getting into the nitty gritty details of how do you actually plan your short term or your day to day type living. So, whether that's making a plan for paying off debt, how much do you need to save for retirement, and all of those things, you can kind of back into them when you have those big goals set in front of you. And I think that, having that answered first, and then you can start diving into how do you start planning in the short to long term to achieve them, is probably the most important part of this question.
Yeah, I believe we've even said it in previous episodes, but it's like how to eat an elephant, and that's one small bite at a time. So
Yep.
the big elephant's your goal. You just got to figure out how to eat it. It just takes one little piece at a time to get there. And part of these living expenses and the changes in your life too is when it's so unique and personal to you is what's like you said, what's important to you. And one of those questions that I tend to see happen quite often is a lot of people have living expenses that slowly increase through just depreciating assets like a vehicle or a
Mm,
boat
yep.
or some other type of toy. And that's something to think about if you're somebody that constantly wants a new vehicle and it's only going to be an extra 50 bucks or 100 bucks a month and I can afford it now. Just something to think about is just, how much more debt are you willing to go into? Is that something that does make you happy? If it is, then just trying to find a way to work around that. And living expenses are ever changing.
Right. Well, it sounds like you're getting to lifestyle creep in a sense.
Yeah.
As you get more income, your living actually grows with it is this essence of lifestyle creep. And that kind of gets into the whole idea of the extra $50 per month for a new car or the extra, I don't know, $30 per month for a new streaming service, whatever it might be. Uh, that lifestyle creep, I think, is something that you really need to avoid. Not completely. I think you should allow yourself to your lifestyle to grow with your income because it's more fun to live that way.
Yep.
But you have to be very thoughtful with it and making sure that even allowing yourself to have a little bit of lifestyle creep, you're not taking away from what your true long term, big term, or big time goals are for your life. So I think that's really something that you need to consider when you're trying to plan for the both the long and short term. And but Drew, thinking about the short term, that brings us to question number 6 is what's the most reliable way to pay off debt? The most reliable way to eliminate debt is just to avoid it in general, which, duh, that's a no brainer, but not really helpful for this conversation. But they do talk about the fact that if you do have debt, one of the ways to actually pay off debt is what's called the debt snowball. And this is made famous by Dave Ramsey, but the debt snowball method is you want to list all of your debts from smallest to largest. Make sure you can pay the minimum balance on each account. Now direct as much extra money as you can each month to the smallest bill until it's paid in full. And then when that debt is cleared, you move to the next smallest balance. And then you just rinse and repeat all the way until you've continued working your way to the largest balance. And then you finally get to pay it off. Drew, what do you think about the debt snowball? Or do you think there's a better way out there to pay off debt?
I'm sure there's a lot of ways out there. I actually really like that snowball just for the psychological purpose of it. And as far as the question above of if you were to lose a job, I think having debt that's manageable that can get out of your life fairly quick and then having extra money in your pocket. I believe with an episode with, Krieger Finance, they were talking every time you pay off some debt, it's like getting a raise.
Right. Yeah.
And I think that psychologically of knowing you don't have the debt there, knowing you don't have the monthly payment, and knowing that you have extra cash in your pocket at the end of the month, and then whether you actually put that extra cash towards your next debt, which is what the snowball is asking for, just because you have the extra
Yeah.
cash, you're spending it anyway, so might as well just keep paying off. So I think that debt snowball, just on the psychological side of things, I think is really awesome. There's always, if you're an Excel person and you're looking at interest rates and how much money you'd be saving over the long term by not paying off the big ones right away. There's always that conversation and
Of course.
an
Of course. Yep.
argument.
Yeah. It's a forever long battle.
Yeah, so there's always that back and forth, but for I think even when we've talked about budgets can be very tedious, and some people just want to simplify things, and the snowball is a way to simplify things. I have $1,000 in credit card debt. I just need to pay off $1,000. I don't care if it's 12% or I have a loan that's 1%. It's just a way to simplify things. You have a clear goal ahead of you and you just go for it.
I think people grossly underestimate the psychological aspect of paying off debt. So Hannah and I, we actually use a debt snowball to pay off all of our student loans and car loans. And let me tell you, the fact that you start with your lowest, smallest balances first, and then you work your way up, you get those quick wins right away, and it makes you believe that rather than looking at $120,000 worth of debt, which we had in our case, we're looking at a debt of, I don't remember what it was, but let's just say $1,000. Like, well, we can do 1,000. Like
Yep.
we can go out and save and pay off $1,000. We can't go out and save and pay off 120 grand like that. And so I think the debt snowball really puts you in a place of one, committing, and two, seeing early wins that keeps the momentum going. And yes, you're, of course, you're right in the fact that interest, you're going to pay more interest over the long term because you're not worrying about the size of the balance or the interest rate.
Hmm.
You're worried about paying off those small balances first and building that momentum. So of course you're going to pay more in interest, but you have a much better chance of actually getting out of debt, and you're going to get out of debt faster.
Yeah, and as I said a little bit earlier, just that fact of having less payments per month if anything were to go south or an unexpected, say, a health expense happens or it goes past your emergency fund, you're not really worrying about making those minimum payments every single month because the
For
low ones
sure.
are just gone. And
Yeah.
a lot of times, even if it's an extra 100, $200 a month, that could be the difference between making it out of your
Right.
hole or
For
not
sure.
making it out of your hole.
Yeah, I mean, if you just invested a couple $100 extra a month, like the way compound interest works is that going to be a large sum of money down the line. So I think that's another reason to advocate, one,
Hmm.
to get out of debt, because I think it's just a really good idea. But two, the fact that you have this extra cushion, whether it's actually for investing or if it's for your emergency fund, or maybe you're get to go out to dinner, one more time a month and really enjoy yourself. All of that is a great way to remove those debts. And you know what else, Drew, when you remove debt? So that brings us to number 7. How can you improve your credit rating? And paying off debt, Drew, is one of the biggest ways. The most important thing you can do to build your credit score is to pay every bill on time, every time. Of course, if that's not the case, and if you're in debt, getting out of debt is going to help improve your credit rating. But you want to make sure that you review and correct any errors on your credit report. Settle your outstanding balances as quickly as you can. So paying off debt, making sure you get it out of your life. Reduce credit utilization to 30% or less. Limit requests for new credit, and making sure that you keep old accounts open and resolve late payments or other issues. Drew, I mean, we live in a world where your credit rating is becoming ever more important, specifically as things get more digitized. But these things are a great way to improve your credit rating.
Two things jump out at me right away that they bring up, which is great, is the credit card utilization rate and limit the new credit or request for new credit. And I
Yeah.
think as I've done more and more research and, just even episodes we've even done, I think that utilization seems to be something I never really thought about in the past. I just would say I would just pay it off or whatever. But if it went higher, I wouldn't think about it depending on the statement date. So like a 30% utilization, that's what is that? So if you had a $10,000 limit, you would want it below like $3,000 by the time your statement gets there. So I think that utilization is just something to definitely think about. And also the starting the new credit is, yes, it might be nice that you can get 20% off on your next purchase. But if you get up a bunch of those, I didn't necessarily realize that when you delete these credit cards or you cut them off, it cuts off years of history with these cards. So if you had a Target card from when you were 19 years old, you never really use it, but you wanted to get rid of it. Now you have close, say you had it for 10 years, 10 years worth of credit history is gone, which then hurts your credit card rating. And it's the rating stuff. I think it just, those are two things that jump out at me. There's so much that goes into them, and there's so much you need credit for if you want to buy larger purchases, such as like a house.
It's really only a score that's going to help you get the best interest rates on a house and a car. So that's why it's super important, but it doesn't really define where you are financially. So if you're sitting with a poor credit score right now,
Hmm.
you can always get it up. And I think the credit utilization is a really good one, Drew, that you called out, and making sure that you keep your accounts open and you make sure you have those timely payments. It doesn't define you. And I think that's ultimately what I'm trying to get at is it's super important, but there's other things that define wealth and define how well you're doing financially outside of your credit score.
Yeah, I think one of the funniest things with credit, and I think like say you have like a Dave Ramsey says, don't get a credit card.
Yeah.
Your
Have a
your
zero
your
zero
perfect
credit
credit,
score.
yeah, your perfect credit score should be zero. And
Yep.
there's definitely that train of thought. And the crazy thing is right now is you could be totally financially set, not in debt, pay everything cash, and there's still things out there. I don't know how cell phones work anymore, but before I had a credit history, I couldn't even pay for a cell phone. I'd be like, I'll
Right.
pay cash for this. I'll pay 6 months in advance for
Yeah.
these. Like,
Yep.
nope, without a credit, you can't do it.
Right.
And you need it to be like somebody to either co-sign or somebody else purchase it, and you just pay that. So I think that stuff is wild. Is in this world, even if you're in a very good financial standing and you have credit card zero, you have enough money to pay for everything cash. Sometimes that's just something they look at.
So, question number 8, Drew, is how much of my income should actually go towards housing? Whether you lease or own, the most common rule of thumb is to not spend more than 30% of your gross monthly income for housing. What do you think about that?
Yeah, the housing one's always difficult. I mean, you never want to be house broke. And sometimes in the market you're in, it's really tough to stay within these rule of thumbs from the finance worlds. Like, so this one says 30%. I just saw an article earlier today that said 28%. So let's say that 30%, if you made 60 grand a year, with that 30% of your gross take home, that's 18,000 a year that you could spend on it, which comes out to be 1,500 a month.
Yeah.
So you're pretty much saying I can only do 1,500 a month. And if you're living in somewhere like Denver, I mean, good luck finding that loan.
Especially when you account for rent or mortgage, utilities, insurance, taxes. Like you have to account for all of that. And this article says in the 30% gross income. Which, yeah, you're totally right. It all depends on the market and your actual job. It's going to be a factor
Yeah.
of where you actually live on that percentage of your monthly income that you live off of
We
for your living expenses.
And we always joke too about house hunters, and they have whatever jobs. Who I think underwater basket weaving, and their budget's $1 million. And some people, I mean, obviously that's way exaggerated, but people somehow find a way to afford more house than they can, and you can do it with less and less money now. Interest rates are even less. And it comes down to the question too, with the saying, the income, how much income you want towards your housing is how important is the house to you, and are you willing to be potentially house broke and not be able
Right.
to do anything else just so you can live in a nice house, or are you willing to live in something a little bit less and put your money towards assets that have better growth?
Yeah, I think that's the important part is planning. So I'm a huge advocate of setting up your retirement or your future life first. Then you can kind of see what you have left over. So I would say you don't want to live in a house that's going to be at the expense of retiring with dignity or retiring, by the age that you want to. Whether it's
Hmm.
30%, 20%, 40%, it doesn't matter at the end of the day. I think
Hmm.
what matters is that you have that holistic plan
Yep.
and making sure that your house, because you're right, Drew, so many people do go house broke. Whether it's because they live in a high area of living, which unfortunately is not really your fault unless you're willing to move, which is a huge ask of a lot of people, or you're just trying to keep up with the Joneses. And as cliche as that sounds, it's really easy to get into a home that you can't technically afford because you want to look, a good with your neighbors or to your family or whomever it might be. But I think as long as you can plan your whole life and you can make sure that your retirement and your future self is okay, I think doesn't really matter how much you spend on your
Yep.
house because you can kind of look at it as you might be spending some of your discretionary income towards living, and I think that's an okay thing to do.
There's 2 points that I brought that came to mind as you were going through that. One is, if you guys watch the Super Bowl, one of the ads is, it's not keeping up with the Joneses anymore, it's keeping up with the Jonases.
Nice.
Then one of the Jonas brothers, I think, is a
Yep.
Toyota commercial.
Yeah.
So I just thought when you said keep with the Jones, it reminded me of that commercial, which is pretty funny. By the way, those new Toyota trucks look actually pretty cool.
They're not bad. They're not bad.
But anyways, the second thing that came to mind too is, part of what income's going towards your housing, renting or buying necessarily isn't that crazy. Everybody says renting is just throwing your money away. Part of what you have to look at too is your timeline in this house. Yeah, you want to put income towards a house, but are you going to be there for only like a year or two and then find a job somewhere else? Maybe it doesn't even make sense to put money towards necessarily a house, but you can put it towards housing as in a rental unit. And if you're only going to be there short term, sometimes those renting is actually can even be a little bit better position. But those are times when you can maybe use this 30% of your income and put that towards your rental and see what you can get.
So, Drew, number 9 is, and I'm super excited about this question because it's something have never really talked on the podcast about, and that's how will you manage finances with members of your household? So, it says deciding how and if to combine your financial resources with a partner or spouse should depend more on your personalities and spending styles than any beliefs about splitting things evenly down the middle. Drew, what are your thoughts about managing money as a household?
This is kind of just one of those ones that I always get scared about scared talking about.
Yeah.
I
Well, it's not
honest
an easy thing.
It's not easy, and honestly, for me, I can say that I haven't even figured this one out completely. Initially, when Jordan and I got married, we were talking about having a joint checking. We've procrastinated. We still have not done a joint checking.
Sure.
We still have our separate stuff. We've talked about maybe even having still our separate accounts, but then having one joint for just our fixed expenses and
Mm.
just monthly ancillary expenses. For this one, it just definitely hits home, literally and figuratively, where it's still something I'm still trying to work through. It's not easy. We had Krieger Finance on that says money shouldn't be weird, and then sometimes it just really is with personalities that uh that can clash almost with finances. And, we even talk with Ian that was on one of the episodes, and he says he doesn't even want to touch personal finances. It's all on his wife's side. So every household tends to be a little different. Definitely a question that needs to be answered. I definitely need to answer that question for our household. I've procrastinated, kind of pushed things off, but this one is, I feel guilty of pushing it off.
Like you said, it's not easy because there's so many factors that go into it. It's what are people's relationships with money? In a couple, typically you're going to have a spender and a saver. And do they butt heads so much that it causes friction in a relationship? So that's something to consider.
Mm-hmm.
Another thing to consider is how much does each person actually bring into the household,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because if one person's bringing in a lot more, or let's just say there's a stay at home parent, well, then is there friction because of spending habits on the person that doesn't work? And so all of that stuff is so complicated and is
Mm-hmm.
something that you really have to think through. Our family, we just split everything right down the middle. I shouldn't say that. That's not the right way to say it. We put all of our money into one account and it's all of ours all the time. Doesn't matter who makes what. Obviously we have the bills being paid out of there, but when it comes to spending, we are just in really good communication about our spending habits, and we try to, as much as it pains me because I'm the saver in the relationship, we try to make sure that we allow ourselves some extra room to spend on things that we actually enjoy. And it's something that's very challenging for people that are like me that are a saver when you are looking at spending money on new dining room chairs, which we actually just did last week, so it's front of mind. But like it's something like that doesn't bring me that much value, but I know brings Hannah value, and I know that it brings other people value when they come into our house, and it's things like that. And so
Mm-hmm.
we've found that joining all of our finances works well for us, but even in doing so, there's still some, I won't call it friction, but there's still some really good communication that needs to happen so that that friction doesn't exist.
And I would say our communication at this household is it's not horrible. I mean, we still like to have our meetings and just saying, what are your expenses right now? What are mine? Is there any like random subscriptions that are out there that you're no longer using that just randomly pop up? How much, if there's like debt on things, like how much is left on it. So it's nice to be able to know that stuff and what we have to do for our monthly expenses, and that's where it helps putting together emergency fund for myself. But there's also something where you're saying what things can bring you value are different than maybe your spouse. And I get sometimes guilty of, I'll say, Amazon shaming my wife.
Here's
And
another package.
here's another package, and hoping that might slow down things. I don't think it really has. And to be honest, it's almost like reverse psychology. I think you just order more when you say that. And sometimes I just do have to take a step back and realize obviously she has her income as well,
Right.
and she's
Right.
not dumb about it. And if that brings her joy, then it does, as long as it's reasonable and she's not buying 3 battleships and whatever else.
But it kind of sounds like the big thing, regardless of how you decide to actually manage money as a household, the big theme here is communication and just being very transparent with your finances and the way that you manage it as a household. So, Drew,
Mhm.
number 10, wrapping us up here. Last question from the article is: should you be saving for retirement if you have credit card debt? I'm not even going to read anything from the actual article. I just want to know what your thoughts are on that.
My initial thoughts are, yeah, you should still be saving for retirement. And the reason that's my initial reaction on it is I personally like to pay for almost all of my monthly expenses on my credit card to get miles off of it. And then I
Yep.
pay it off at the end of the month. So part of my credit card, debt or saving is fairly short term. And so the extra money that's left over that's kind of planned out in my budget would go towards either my long term investing or my short term stock trading. So
What about for those people that have ongoing credit card debt or even debt in general? What do you think about saving for retirement versus paying off debt or, doing them at the same time?
depending on the severity of that credit card debt and depending on what other debt you have out there, I actually don't mind freezing retirement spending just for a short period of time if you can put the plan together and get something manageable and under control. I know that there's compounding interest and we harp on it a lot, but I think if you're in a very bad financial position and you're drowning in debt, I don't think it's horrible if you can put together a plan to then pause some retirement or at least, shave off some of the percentage that you are putting towards that you can actually plan towards getting rid of some of that toxic debt. But you have to have a plan because if you pay all that stuff off and then you put yourself in that position again, then you're still not putting retirement in for another period, which can be scary. So the plan for that for me is kind of where it comes into control and how much toxic debt's actually out there.
Kind of on the side of just get debt out of your life. Not all debt. I think mortgages are important because one, houses are just so expensive. It's almost impossible to pay cash for them nowadays. But I'm on this fence or on the side of the fence of just get debt out of your life, pause retirement, and then you can invest later. And that's exactly what Hannah and I did when we got out of debt. Now it only works, like you were saying, if you change your relationship with money and you don't go back into debt and push retirement and saving investing off more into the future. For us, it was 18 months where we didn't invest into retirement. And I'll be totally honest, like those 18 months were pretty good years that we would have saw in the market, right?
Yep.
But we knew that once we got out of our debt, we knew that we were going to have an extra like 1,000 to $1,500 to invest if we wanted to
Hmm.
because we didn't have debt anymore. And so for us, one, it was psychologically appealing to just get out of debt and just not have that weight on our shoulder.
Yep.
But then two, knowing that once we got out of debt, we could start actually hitting some of the or working towards more of these long-term goals. So that's why I say that I think that it's perfectly okay. And what I actually did to just get that out of your life. You can put a pause on retirement savings, but only if you're willing to make the sacrifices to get out of debt as fast as you can and then make sure that you don't go back into debt after the fact so that you can save and invest for retirement then.
This kind of brings up just something like a theme maybe I've seen through some of our episodes and some of our interviews with entrepreneurs is a way to keep things simplified and focus on certain areas. And there's times where if you don't have this plan for something or this focus, that you can say, well, I have 401k and I'm putting stuff towards these benefits and I'm putting something towards emergency fund. I'm doing this and doing that and that and that. Sometimes you can get so much on your plate that
Yeah,
if you're not if you're not focused on one thing, then nothing's really getting any type of focus.
right.
So I think the theme of having that focus on one area is really going to help benefit because if you drowned in so many different items and you don't have the intention towards a certain part of your personal finances, it can be very overwhelming. So if there's a time where you have to pause that retirement, just so that you can have intention and focus on paying off this debt or this credit card, I don't think there's anything wrong with that.
Drew, I think that's one of the best ways to wrap up these 10 questions is having intention and focus throughout your whole financial picture, whether that's paying off debt, whether that's saving for retirement, whether that's deciding if you need to pay for your children's college or if you want to help them out in any way, shape, or form. But Drew, what a really good article. What a great group of questions. I think as I was reading them and preparing for this episode, it really sparked a lot of additional questions that I still need to think through. And I know you already said that you need to think through at least one of them, but hopefully our listeners here got a lot of value out of this conversation.
Yeah, and going through this article, it's a very good starting point, and I hope people, when they hear us talk about it, realize that we go through some of the same struggles as everybody else. Just because we've talked about personal finance or we like to do some extra research on it, we're still human at the end of the day, and there's so much information out there that we struggle just as much as the next person. But having the support group of Cavan or other people or other podcasts or other YouTubes is so beneficial that you can continue to learn and continue to uh, sharpen the blade of your personal finance.
How much do you need to actually retire? Well, that depends on how much money you want to spend each and every year in retirement. Here's one way you can figure that out. After you've figured out how much you want to spend each and every year in retirement, all you have to do is times that number by 25, and that will generally give you how much you need to save and invest for your retirement nest egg. This is what they call the 4% rule. It basically states that in retirement, you'll be able to withdraw 4% from your retirement nest egg, increase it each and every year to account for inflation, and have a really good chance that you'll never run out of money. This also assumes that your retirement portfolio will consist of 60% stocks and 40% bonds. Now, it's not a perfect rule of thumb, and it may even be outdated, but it gives you a good starting point and a number to shoot for as you start to save and invest for your retirement and for the future. And that's the 4% rule in this week's Money Minute. So while I was off doing the Vegas scene this last weekend, what has been going on over in your neighborhood?
Well, shredding the gnar. I actually
Totally gnarly, dude.
I don't even know where that comes from, the gnar, but I did go skiing, so I was
I don't even know what that means, if I'm going to be totally honest with you.
I don't either. I just hear people say it. So I just
Trying to
wanted to
fit
say,
in with the cool kids.
yeah, I guess. But I went skiing. There's a little hill near our hometown, and we had a babysitter. We had my wife's mom and sister come up for the weekend, and we actually babysat for a couple hours. We went with another couple, and their kid was also being babysat at her house as well. But getting away for that day was pretty awesome to go skiing. I've been having the itch to do it for quite some time, especially with the Olympics going on, especially seeing all my feeds on Instagram and stuff. But it was like 1 degrees? And I think earlier that
That's
day,
tough.
the earlier day was like -13.
Yeah.
Plus with wind chill. So it was definitely cold. And going down the hill, there was like a spot on my forehead that just like you get like a brain freeze going down.
Yeah.
But as you get a couple of runs in and you cover up, I finagled my hat so it wasn't really chilly there anymore. But definitely
I just
cold.
imagine like the big Pillsbury Doughboy. You just like jacket and everything just like poofy going down the hill in the slopes.
Well, I did do that, but but there's one time, all in all, very fun. Had a couple drinks, got ski down the hill, which I wanted to do. But right towards, it was the last one of the last runs we did. I'm going down, and all of a sudden, I look off to the side and I see this fresh powder, but there's only one ski track through it, and it was like going off into the woods. And he's like, you know what? I'm getting a little bit more comfortable on the skis today, so I'm going to try it. And
Or some liquid courage.
that too. So I go off right when I get off the main path. I didn't realize, but the snow was up to about my hips, and my skis went right down.
Nice.
I took a tumble.
Yeah.
And I kept trying to get out, so I lost my skis. I was trying to I had one ski on, one ski off. I was trying to get back up, but every time I stepped, I'd go down to like my hips deep in snow, and I finally got back up. And then when I went down to the the chalet, the people I was skiing with were like, "We were wondering what happened to you. You were like right behind us, and then you were just gone."
Just literally ate powder.
And they're like, "But we saw a lot of snow on your jacket coming down, so I thought maybe you fell," which I
Nice.
did. That was my excitement for the weekend. I know you went to Vegas. We got to hear about that story because I did hear that you got a flight canceled.
Yeah. So, boy, that was wild. So, we were supposed to leave on Thursday right after Hannah got home from work. For reasons unbeknownst to me, Sun Country decided to cancel our flight. Delta was still flying, Spirit was still flying. And so we're like, what the heck are we gonna do? Like, we were only gonna go for 3 days or 3 nights, and we had like shows booked, we had our hotels booked, and of course we booked them through a third party site, so you can't get refunded. So like, we're out of luck. We're gonna be out like whatever amount of money that we actually paid.
Yep.
And so like I'm panicking. I'm calling Delta. I'm calling Spirit, which, as everyone knows, calling an airline is like at least a 45-minute wait. But I'm trying
Mm-hmm.
to get a hold of them and be like, hey, do you have room on your flight tonight so we can go? Finally got a hold of them. Nothing. Nada. So we're sitting and let me put this out there. This is on Hannah's birthday. So like the excitement on her birthday to go to Vegas and
Yep.
like enjoy a weekend, just us away from the kids as much as we love them. Like it was exciting,
Yep.
but nothing. So like a big nothing burger, I guess you could call it.
What a
But
downer.
I know it gets better. Trust me. But I found a flight for Frontier the next day, the next evening, I should say.
Mm-hmm.
That was actually affordable. Everything in the morning was like $600+ a seat one way. So like,
Yep.
yeah, no. We got the flight to Frontier, which was actually cheaper than our Sun Country flight, which was nice. And we made it out there. Like kind of just like a whirlwind of
Do you get your money back from
on
Sun Country?
we yes, we will. Otherwise I will make high hell up in whoever the poor
Yeah.
person is on the other side of the phone. But no, they said they're supposed to give it back to us, which is good. But
In
yeah,
the
so
form of voucher or cash?
they give you a voucher, but then I think you call in and get cash
Yep.
if you
Okay.
want. Redeem it for cash. But so we actually got on the flight to Frontier, and because we had such a round or start to the trip, as in like we didn't get to start our trip, Hannah and I were sipping cocktails all the way out there, made it in time for our show, and we kind of just did the rest of the Vegas thing, which everyone knows what that is, right? At the end of the day, I will say though, I did not gamble, and I'm very proud of myself
I'm
for being
surprised.
true to my guns. Yeah, I know.
I was kind of gambling at my house, thinking like, I
Yeah,
bet Cavan will play
right.
blackjack or something.
See, the thing is, I absolutely love blackjack, but I, as I get older, I absolutely can't stand losing money to a game. Like it just really bothers me, especially when it's a game of chance. Like I love the game of chance, but the fact of losing money is, oh, it's just like a sword to the heart and like twisting and turning as I walk away from the table. So I did not do that, but we did see us a couple pretty awesome shows. Cirque du Soleil,
Mm-hmm.
Mystere, fantastic. I would see it again in a heartbeat. It was so awesome. We saw a couple of other things too that were highlight. Oh, Drew, I will say the high flyer. It's a big Ferris wheel, whatever it's
Mm-hmm.
actually called. I can't remember the name, but we did the happy hour
Mm-hmm.
on there, and let me tell you, that was so much fun. And I probably took full advantage of the all you can drink
Well, you know,
option of the happy hour.
you're a personal finance guy. You got to take advantage
Yeah.
of those deals.
Well, it was an extra $30 for the all you can drink, but one cocktail is like 18. So
Yeah.
it's like if I have two, I get my money back.
It's like economies of scale. It's like the more you put down, the cheaper it gets.
Absolutely.
What an exciting episode that we had on today. Maybe you guys didn't think so, but we thought it was exciting. There's definitely questions that we found out that maybe we pushed off a little while that we need to get answered. We hope it was a great starting point for people listening to this episode to start thinking about their personal finance journey and their intention behind their personal finance journey. So once again, we want to thank you so much for joining the neighborhood. We want to be your neighbor, so just be our neighbor. Don't forget to subscribe, and we'll see you guys next week in the neighborhood.